Tonight, screenwriter Dale Launer, who's responsible for penning some of the most beloved comedies of the past 25 years, including My Cousin Vinny, Dirty Rotten Scoundrels, and Ruthless People, the hysterically funny film starring Danny DeVito, Bette Midler, Judge Reinhold, and Helen Slater, that was released in the U.S. on June 27th, 1986.
Well, I think I was a little naive. I liked movies, and I went in and, the director got a tremendous amount of credit for the movie. And while I was in film school, my first film, or might have been my second, I remember I wrote it and I shot it and I was editing it, and it looked good. It was kind of before there were the babysitter at home, Night Stalker kind of movies, I was very interested in Hitchcock. So, it was a babysitter at a big house, and there's weird noises coming from somewhere in the house. And, she gets a knife and she goes and investigates, that kind of thing. Mm-hmm. So, but the ending was bad. And so I remember showing it to people who liked it. They were impressed with the directing, the camera angles, everything, except the ending, which was terrible. Mm-hmm. And then I realized what's really more important here is the writing rather than anything else. So I started focusing on that. I also was of the mind that most directors write their own material. I thought they did. And if they didn't write it, I didn't think the writer did everything that I realize they do now. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. 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 And I also realize, when I meet people out of the movie business, and when they will ask me something like, what do you do? I'm a screenwriter. What'd you do? Have I seen anything you have done? And so I give them my credits, and then they go, wow. Hopefully they say, wow. And then inevitably they'll ask this following question almost every time. When you say you write the screenplay, just what exactly does that mean? Which I'm amazed by, right? And then when you tell them exactly what a screenwriter does, they're a little surprised. Sometimes they believe you, sometimes they really don't believe you, because they have, in some ways, invested many years in a belief system that the director and the star are really the creative engine for a movie. Mm-hmm, and mm-hmm. that perhaps the writer comes up with a vague idea for the story, like maybe the concept, right? And then the director works it out, and then the star comes up with the dialogue. And if it's written well, it feels like the star is actually saying that dialogue. It feels like they're actually making it up, like they're actually reacting that way, if the star is good and the material is good. So they're convinced, really, that star came up with those jokes and those lines and those decisions, and that the director sort of molded the arc of the story.
So it sounds like it sounds like, as you're describing it, and the perception out there about the position of screenwriter, that it's a pretty thankless job. So what attracts you to it?
To some degree it is, to some degree it is. And but I did realize that was the most important thing in filmmaking, and that I wanted to get better and better at the writing. And I used that the best stepping stone to directing is really writing. Occasionally it's directing commercials now, or occasionally it's directing music videos,
Well, you hear it all the time that you could have a weak performance here and there. You could have not incredibly sharp direction here and there, and other elements of the film can compensate for that. But there is no compensating for a bad screenplay. There's no way to kind of overcome that.
Yeah, if you've got your characters doing something stupid, and it's a drama, you can't get over that. Yeah, you can't fix that. You're right. I mean, a great screenplay can survive mediocre direction. I don't know if it can. To be honest with you, I don't think good writing can get past a bad actor.
Right.
I've seen bad actors and mediocre actors really screw up scenes and take the life and energy out of something. It's a big difference, and most people don't notice it. If you see a good performance or a decent performance, you think that's it. It can't get any better. If you're a writer, you can imagine it better because you know how it was in your head or on the page, and generally there's a checklist on each line and each moment and each joke or gag or emotional moment. And, did they nail it? Did they come close? Is that okay? That's workable. Let's just move on. But mediocre directing, there are people who say that movies can get made without directors. And conceivably they could. It'd be interesting to make a movie without a director. You'd have to write it very clearly and very precisely. But, cinematographer would know the pieces, that the editor needs. The editor can put it together, and the editor can pick out the right performances. And, again, if you're cast well, that's 90% of directing, I think.
What interests me from what you said just a few minutes ago is that you're known, obviously, primarily for your great comedy work. And you mentioned Hitchcock as an early influence. And didn't your father work for Hitchcock as an actor?
Yeah, he was in Marnie, and he was in a few of the Hitchcock. I think Alfred Hitchcock Presents TV show. I think that's what it was called.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So was that where your initial interest in Hitchcock's work came from?
No, not really. You think that would matter? It was only till sort of later that I grew to appreciate Hitchcock for his filmmaking skills and how he would like to present a movie in a way that was very visual, and he would do occasionally some incredibly clever things with the camera, more often than any other director I could think of. And you don't see a lot of that anymore. You see people who steal from him. Or you have someone like like Orson Welles and Citizen Kane, which has a great theatrical look, but is not necessarily the most visually expressive movie or cinematically. Looks great. Love how the camera moves in and here and everything like that. But can he tell a joke with the camera in a way that's unique to filmmaking? Charlie Chaplin was always very good. He wasn't really doing stuff that was cinematic in the sense that, like how do you get a joke by moving the camera or the way you're editing or an angle or something like that. He would just do really clever visual stuff, on a static camera, generally.
Yeah. So how aware when you write a comedic screenplay, are you aware of creating some kind of blueprint for visual design? I mean, to have it be interesting from a visual standpoint.
Well, if you get too involved in that, then the director feels like you're treading in their arena, and they may, out of just pure ego, reject it and do something else. You have to kind of find a subtle way to do it. I used to write I still write in a certain way that will imply, and I didn't see other people write in this way, that will imply. If I want another shot, I'll bring in another line. It'll be a separate line. So if I want all in one shot, I'll keep that in one paragraph. So that's a subtle way of telling the director what to do, more of a subconscious way of doing it. In general, if you do that, the director, you get all those pieces. Sometimes there are certain visual things which are important in the story, but you have to work them into the story. Then you'll get something visual out of it. Ruthless People, the whole Memphis inspired design movement at the time was something I was trying to work into the screenplay. But that also had that worked for a certain reason because the characters, it had to be important. And Bette Midler's character had to be a woman who was really interested in contemporary art and, as a result, contemporary design and fashion, right? And then one of the kidnappers, the female kidnappers, is a tremendously insecure would-be fashion designer who won't show her clothes to anybody. And then there's a little moment where they bond, and she shows it to her. And this is a woman who loves fashion and knows fashion and thinks she's terrific. That's a hugely exciting moment for her, right? Or at least it should be, anyhow.
It is. I love the movie. I've always loved this movie, and I think 2 years ago we had on Judge Reinhold, and he said that's just the funniest movie, one of the funniest movies ever made, and I'm in it, and I can't believe how funny it is.
Yeah,
it's wonderful.
It's funny.
Movie.
There's a couple of Facebook websites. One is people who used to work at University Stereo, and I did. And another is people who used to work in the Federated Group, which I did too. So I got on those, and I'm chatting with people, and it's very funny how both of them independently, somehow we started talking about how we sell stereo equipment, this and that, and then they both brought up Ruthless People, the scene in Ruthless People, because there was a lot of truth to it, you know, and sometimes you would sell a speaker that didn't have a big woofer, and you'd have to explain it's what you do with it, not blah, blah, blah. So on both those websites, people brought that up, unaware that I had written the movie, which, was very funny moments, I said, well,
that's nice.
I wrote that movie.
That's nice. It's out there in the vernacular. It's still to this day.
And so people there was a scene where, and somebody linked it online, the two stereo store scenes in there with Judge, and the first one with Judge trying to sell people good gear, right? But he somehow insults this girl's friend who's wearing this Ferrari shirt, right? Right. And the guy thinks he knows everything, and he has these speakers called Dominators, and thinks they're fantastic, And then Judge says, "No, they're a big joke, really. Here, this is a good speaker." And the thing is, selling people good equipment was harder than selling bad equipment, because the bad equipment was big and had big woofers, and it was cheaply made, and they go boom, 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 and people go, "Wow, that's great," and then you make a lot of money. The salesman made the most. Yeah, other ones just went with the flow, and it was just like it was easier to sell that, and and then he, I don't know. There's some stuff in the end, which is, he says if you can't afford it, fucking finance it, right? Stereo guys love that, and they all got that, and they all got that sales thing, right? And there was something else which I would use as a salesman to try to step people up into a more expensive system, and which is the idea, you get something this good, you'll have it the rest of your life. And they start thinking like, I said, you're not going to have a car the rest of your life. You're not going to live in a house the rest of your life. But this kind of gear, you can have the rest of your life, And when you're gone, they'll still make money at the estate sale with it, right? You can make jokes like that, but the idea that you can have this the rest of your life, well, there you go, right?
Right, it's a selling point,
It's a good pitch,
So you wrote. So this was
there
an
was all these
aspect of
pitches. So there was another one. So the joke on that is he tells the kid, so what? If it's as big as a Subaru, and costs as much, you'll have it. You'll have it your entire life. When you die, they can bury you in it.
That's so great. So this aspect of the screenplay is something that you knew. I mean, they I've heard that old adage, write what you know. But what other aspects of this?
The movie's more about kidnapping. I don't know that much about kidnapping.
Right.
The movie, actually enough, what's weird is that through writing it, even though I was a friend of O. Henry, a fan of O. Henry, not a friend, and I had read Ransom of Red Chief. When I came with the idea for Ruthless People, it was actually inspired by Patty Hearst's kidnapping. And, at a certain point, she joins her kidnappers. And she believes, she is not wanted back. And so I put a little twist on that, which is, what if, a guy, what if her grandparents hated her, and then it turned into, what if it was some guy and he hates his wife and she's been kidnapped? He's like, hey, this is great. Go ahead. And what if he actually wanted to kill her? There was two ways of doing it, either wanting to kill her and not having the nerve to do it, which in some way works better, but if you need the plot complication that comes later, which is that they actually find evidence of him having planned on killing her, and they assume he actually had killed her, right?
Right.
So I had him coming home to kill her, right?
Hello?
Hi, Sam.
Well, thank God it's you. Listen, I've been thinking about your last offer, and I think you're right. I cannot refuse. $10,000 is fair and totally acceptable.
She's in bad shape, Sam. You've been torturing her.
Don't kill her. Don't kill her.
We found out your wife is worth quite a bit more than $10,000.
What do you mean?
We changed our minds. We've upped the ransom.
To what?
We're up to $2 million.
$2 million? Are you out of your fucking mind? Where'd you get an incredible figure like that?
Oh, you'd be surprised at the quality and quantity of information a lit cigarette can provide.
What kind of gems? How many?
I don't know!
The pitch black.
Wasn't this one of the first Touchstone films, or?
I think it was the second one.
Okay, because
First
I
one, I think,
remember
was Down and Out in Beverly Hills.
Okay, because I remember when it came out, and there was lots of talk about, it's a subdivision of Disney, and they're going to release kind of adult, edgier stuff, and there was a lot of press about that in relation to Down and Out, but especially Ruthless People, I remember.
Well, also in Ruthless People, I remember, sitting down with the Zucker brothers, and we went through some rewrites, and a subplot that came out of those rewrites. I remember that. And also, I was, we would have these creative meetings, and they'd be funny, occasionally contentious. Most of the contentious part was me, because I was terrified they'd go over the top with it, which they said they wouldn't. Then they did, and then they denied it, and now they admit it. It only took 25 years, at least 2 out of 3, And at one of the meetings, I was telling them a joke about how, I was at home with a couple of roommates, and, and I had a wrong number, right? And somebody said, is Debbie there? I said, is Debbie, who's this? Says Ralph. I said, listen, Ralph, Debbie can't talk right now. My dick's in her mouth. I have to call you back as soon as I'm finished. And I hung up. Now, my roommates all looked at me like, the fuck was that? I said, it was the wrong number, right? Well, we must have laughed for 10 minutes straight, right? That was like painful laughing. It was just, I don't know, an inspired, probably drug-induced moment. But it was pretty funny. And I'd mention that to them, and they're like, oh, you got to put that in the script. You got to put that in the script, right?
Yeah.
So, we work it into the script. It's really more of a non sequitur in the script, but it's so funny that, it works well with Sam Stone's character, and
right.
Because he's such a son of a bitch, right? He just enjoys being a son of a bitch. And I remember we had a meeting, one of the drafts, a creative meeting, and Katzenberg sat down at a table. Here we had Disney. And Katzenberg is sort of going through the script page by page, and going over these notes and stuff, and he was very thorough, and he was somewhat notorious for that. I had no problem with it. I liked it. He was very direct and clear. And I remember once telling him, half the stuff you tell us is like ridiculous. I can only do half of it. He says, the fact you can do half is fantastic. Yeah. Most people can't even do 10%, right? So I realized, shit, I've given him what he wants. He thought I was great, right? I thought I was letting him down. Anyways, And then he turns, and now we know exactly where this joke is. He turns the page, and we're all like, we're already giggling, right? And he's like, he pauses, and he says, okay, yeah. I know you guys think this is very funny, and I think this is very funny, yeah. This is still the Walt Disney Company, okay? And we'll shoot it, yeah. If it's a big laugh, okay, we'll keep it in. If it's a little laugh, really, we have to let it go. So we said, okay. Then, at the first test screening, right? Now, this is it's a fairly conceptual joke, because you only hear one end of it. And he says, I love wrong numbers. You have to sort of go back and in your mind, what did he just say? Oh, my God, right? So what it is, he says, I love wrong numbers. You do not get an immediate laugh. There was a fraction of a second that it looked like the room, all the goodwill we had built up in the rest of the movie was sucked dry, okay? There was a beat there. Nobody laughs. It's absolute, utter silence, right? And then all of a sudden, the audience gets the joke, but some of them get the joke a fraction of a second later. Well, it's this tidal wave of laughter, right? And as the people start laughing, then other people kind of like, oh, my God, they get it. And there's this laughter. It just builds and builds. It's like an atomic bomb or something, It was a huge laugh. I mean, and had to recut the movie because, the laughter cut into the dialogue. We recut it again. We cut it a third time. And to be honest with you, laughter still goes into the dialogue. Yeah. It's one of those things, really, you need 30 seconds after that, which is, if you're watching at home on TV, yeah, it would seem wrong, but it was one of those great little moments. Yeah.
There's something about seeing a movie, a comedy, especially in a theater. It's infectious. I have seen comedies being the only person in the theater or at home, and then I watch them again with a full audience. It's an entirely different experience.
Yeah, laughter is a social experience. You want to have your comedy played in a theater with poor acoustics. That is not a dead room, but a fairly live room, because you want to hear the laughter. If you're sitting in the back of a dead room in a comedy, it feels like the comedy died. If you're sitting in the same room in the middle of the audience, and you're surrounded by laughter, movie's hilarious, right? You want to get closer to the center, or you want to have live walls. I think what somebody should do is find a way to put a digital delay system and microphones at different places and have sort of like canned laughter. Not canned laughter, but, let's say the front, rear side. The front, rear side, it's the same thing. The front left, right? You have a microphone and maybe a speaker back into the back rear. I don't know. It's an interesting idea. But,
yeah.
It's just you need to hear the laughter to laugh yourself.
Do you find, especially with comedies, that the test screening process is especially crucial?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Much easier with a conventional, it's not a conventional movie at all. A Abrams Zucker movie like Airplane or the Scary Movies. Are they scary? Yeah, the Scary Movies.
Right.
Or what was the Top Gun thing that...
Hot Shots.
Hot Shots. Those, they would do parody with a satire tone. And so they'd be making fun of movies. And you can go and put in any gag you want, and if it doesn't work, you just go to the next gag. Unfortunately, the kind of movies I write, where they're heavily plotted, so it's hard to go to the next gag. But sometimes there's enough dialogue in there where if the joke doesn't work, you can cut it out. Well, generally, I don't have characters who are terribly clever. So a lot of it is not about that certain kind of comic delivery. Although I was just watching one of them the other day, and I put in a couple things like that, and the actor, this will remain nameless, really didn't deliver the joke well. So if you write situational humor, the actor can play the situation, and even if they're not funny, they'll be funny. Ideally, they'll know how to be funny and still play it straight. Robert De Niro is very good at that.
Right.
He plays comedy like drama. But he knows it's funny, right? He knows why it's funny. So he's one of my favorite comic actors.
Yeah, and I think it plays so much better when you play in terms of performance, when you play the truth of it, where you don't play the joke, you play the moment.
Yeah. I mean, Sam Stone he hates his wife. He loathes his wife. He comes home to kill his wife, right? Mm-hmm. And there's someone that says, phone rings, we've kidnapped your wife. At first he can't believe it. And then once he starts to believe it, he's utterly tickled, right? That's just hilarious to me,
Yeah, I got to tell you.
Or later in that movie, are we just talking about Ruthless People or talking about anything?
We can talk about anything you want, you want.
Okay. Later on, there's another gag where there's two people talking at cross purposes, and Sam Stone's mistress has a video, she thinks, of Sam killing his wife. Now she thinks Sam's going to kill her, right? It's actually a man, an older man with a hooker in a car, right? Having sex with a hooker in a car. And she's afraid Sam's, going to kill her, and she sends us to the chief of police, right? And and it's clearly on TV, and we can clearly see the man and the hooker, right? And then we cut to the chief of police. It's him, right? He's the guy with the hooker, right?
Yes.
Now that's funny. Now all you have to do is play his horror, right? He could play it funny, but he's got to play horror. However you play it, it's going to be funny, right?
Right.
I don't know how you could screw it. You really have to work hard to find a dramatic way to make it unfunny. But it's going to be funny. Then she calls him on the phone, right? And, she says, did you see? Yeah, I saw it. What do you think? Well, all he has to do is play it straight. Well, obviously it's very funny. It's very disturbing. Yes, I know. That poor woman. What she had to go, all right. But later, in another call, and she's upset, Sam Stone has been released. I can't, he is, he can't do it. But at one moment, he loses it with her, and he's, she's telling that horrible thing that happened. I was like, oh, come on already, will you? Yeah. It's a lonely man leading a little excitement.
Right. Life. Yes.
And she's horrified, It's like someone's going out to sport kill or something. So I don't know. That's all just.
And I got to tell you, there's the one of the great dim characters in the history of movies for me is Bill Pullman's character in the film, and there's just a few moments in movies where I've laughed so hard I'm crying.
Yeah.
And the scene between he and Judge Reinhold, particularly. Where they start shooting at the car, and he's wondering who did that, or where did that come from? It's just one of the great.
Yeah, where's your gun? Yeah, that's right. I don't have one.
Is that a tough process for a writer because you're so invested?
Did I use the word collaboration? Is that you?
Well, no, you were sitting at a table with the Zuckers and
there you go.
Going over things. I'm sorry.
Maybe I did use the word. I don't know.
Is that a tough proposition because you're so invested in what you've done, and then as a writer you kind of have to give up your baby and pray that it's not tinkered with to the point of being unrecognizable.
Yeah, it's a little like raising a child well. And if you raise the child well, you can walk away, and the child will go out there, they'll drive cars, they'll smoke pot, they'll do things, and, you know, and they'll still have a successful life.
Mm-hmm.
If you've made mistakes, boy, it'll show up, and it'll show up on the screen, too.
Yeah.
So if you write a very tight, highly plotted movie, it's hard for the directors to screw it up, but God knows.
Well, I would think any artist, any creative person, I think they have kind of a more sensitive kind of center to them. But at the same time, you have to have a thick skin to go through this process of actually getting a movie done.
Yeah.
I mean, Blind Date, I think, was a film that you couldn't recognize from your initial conception, wasn't it?
No. Yeah, it wasn't just the directing. It was the script was taken away from me and then given to Leslie Dixon to rewrite. What I had was too edgy and too dark, I was told. They wanted to. Jeff Zagansky said he wanted to give it to a woman writer to soften it up. He later denied saying that, but I remember verbatim. So I think he denied it later because once he heard it coming out of my mouth, he realized how sexist that was, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And Leslie Dixon does write certainly lighter than I do. And then that rewritten draft was given to Blake Edwards. I did not read Leslie Dixon's draft and then Blake Edwards' draft. All I did is read, the combination of those two rewrites together, and it was kind of frightening to me. It was incredibly disappointing. I mean, that's a pretty stupid movie. And what I wrote, I thought was really one of my best scripts. I still think it's a really good script, and it was a script that had been handed out by other studio executives, been given to writers saying, this is what we're looking for. It's kind of a reality-based, situational-based comedy. Can you come up with something like this? Because too many times they were given joke movies, where it was just anything for a laugh. So they wanted something that, that was a little tighter. And, it was Blind Date was not a sophisticated movie at all. But the script, I thought, had a great reality base to it. It was really about a guy who was, wanted to be a rock and roller. And he found himself in his 30s, his mid-30s, and he goes to a 15-year high school reunion. And he's in the parking lot, and, everybody's driving Mercedes, BMWs, and Porsches. And then he gets to his car, which is a 64 four-door Falcon, right? And, and the narration said, I was getting tired of driving this beat-up car and living, the life of the struggling bohemian artist. And he wanted to just give in, He wanted a good job. He wanted to drive a new car, right? He wanted to live in a nice place. He wanted to eat. We wanted to be more successful. But he was a very talented guy, right? And so, you see he's struggling at this new job, and and it was a job where there's a certain amount of sales involved. And if you're involved in sales, there's a certain game you have to play there. And it's hard to be rock and roll cool and sell something. You try to imagine Keith Richards as a used car salesman. It doesn't make sense, He's too cool to do that. He would not do a good job with it. He'd come out and say, hey, man, what are you doing? Right? It's not how you sell a car. That's not a salesman's greeting, right?
It's got to be a bit more aggressive, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So in the movie, it's really about a guy who, I remember I once saw a postcard, and there was a guy, I think he was wearing a pink leather motorcycle jacket with all kinds of little emblems coming off, and his ears were studded. He had a jelly roll haircut, and I think he might have been wearing makeup. And it said something like, too cool for school, yet too stupid for the real world. and there's a little thought pillow above him. He says, maybe I'll start a band, right? And I always liked that, right? And that was sort of what the character was. He was just a little too cool, right? And for his own good. And stuff happens in the movie, whereas it could affect his career and help his career, he's too cool to do it. And the blind date, at one point, you know, she says, you know, at the restaurant, go over and talk to that guy. Yeah. You want to be a rock and roll musician? Yeah. Go talk to him. Ask him if you could be in his band. They don't do that. That's not how it's done. Well, how is it done? You're good. Your reputation precedes you, and they hear about you, and they come to you and ask you. And to her, that's incredibly frustrating. So I said, yes. So she says, come on, opportunity is knocking. You won't even get up and answer the door. So there's the conflict, right? She's drunk and will say anything, right? But it's a little about who she really is, right? And this guy is too cool to sell himself, right, let alone anything else. So that was really part of the movie. Now, I'm sorry, that was part of the screenplay. The movie, I don't know what that movie was about. It was just a stupid screwball movie.
Wow. Yeah, that did.
But I had him, you know, it was dark. I mean, it was dark, but it was funny. And then later, after Midnight comes out, there's a bunch of movies that sort of copied it, or were inspired by it. Because what happens when a script sells for a lot of money, other screenwriters, aspiring screenwriters, clamor to get it, and they pick it clean, right? I mean, really, they're like vultures that sort of come down, and they see bits and pieces, and they won't steal actual lines. They'll steal little parts of it and twist it around and put it in their own script. So if your script goes out, if it doesn't get made quickly, yeah, you'll see it shows up in other movies. There's little drags that'll show up. There's lines that they're barely modified and barely changed that'll show up.
Well, you know,
I remember in Ruthless People, I mean, there was a gag I put in there where someone used a dustbuster as a marital aid, right? They call it a sex toy, right? And that showed up, I don't know, in probably 2 or 3 other movies. It's weird. Wow. It's like, how can you make that gag? And, I don't know, but that's hack writing, you know.
Well, you know, the remakes are all the rage now, so maybe we can get a remake of your blind date script.
Oh, that'd be great. Yeah. Yeah, because it's so much different. You know, I was told somebody was remaking it. I'm also told that someone was remaking Dirty Rotten Scoundrels. It didn't come to me.
Wow.
And they gave it to the guy who does Hot Tub Time Machine.
What are you working? Are you working on something now? Or?
Yeah. I'm working on a couple of things. A Ruthless People musical.
Really?
Yeah. I was trying to get the Vinnie there. I wrote a sequel to My Cousin Vinny, you know, before Vinnie came out. And you know, Marissa dropped out of it before it was finished. She never even read it. Then years later, she wanted to do it, and the studio said, you know, too much time had passed. So I said, well, if you're not going to do it, I said, I'd like to turn it into a play, because it would be a great play. Because it takes place, you know, it could take place. In this place, it would open up in the Old Bailey, and she's been arrested. And, you know, Vinnie wants to get her off. Now, it's just an inquiry. It's not an actual trial. But an inquiry is like a mini trial, right? So it's a committal proceeding, which is someone comes up with the evidence, and the judge decides whether or not there's enough evidence there to go to trial or not. And then the evidence comes out. You know, she was taken off a plane. They found a bomb on the plane. They overheard her planning with Al-Qaeda. They found a remote detonating device in her purse. They found her fingerprints on the remote detonating device, and they found her fingerprints all over the bomb. Plus, they believe they have a confession of her saying that she's part of a proscribed terrorist group or an illegal group. And that's the end of the first act. It's almost the end of the first act, and then they keep coming in with new evidence, right? and he has no idea what's going on. She's furious at him, and he doesn't know why. She won't tell him why. And every time new pieces of evidence come out, which are more and more damning, she breaks out in laughter. So it's just one of those weird things, And so it's a great stage play because, and then the last thing that comes in, they have evidence that he knew about it. And he has no idea what's going on, right? And now he is now also being arrested, okay? He is now he has to defend himself and her, and that's the end of the first act. So
wow, some major complications going
on. Oh, man,
yeah,
just pour it on. But the studio said, if the studio has the movie rights, so it would make sense for them to say, yeah, go ahead, put on a play.
Mm-hmm.
But they said, they put something in the contract like, yeah, go ahead and put on the play, but if it's not successful, okay, then we get the rights to turn Vinny into, you have to give up your rights to Vinny as a stage play. Wow. It's like, wow, so here I'm going to go try to take something you have, turn it into money, yeah, and then you want to punish me for it, yeah. If I fail? Jesus Christ, yeah. What's wrong with you people?
Wow.
Yeah.
But that's such a special dynamic you created between Vinny and his girl in that film. I mean, that's one of the great comedic relationships.
Thanks. Yeah.
As is Dirty Rotten Scoundrels, obviously. I mean, I think of your films, and I mean the situations that you present just spark off so many different kinds of possibilities. But the characters are well defined. I mean, I remember the characters, and I find that a lot of comedies, especially that I watch, I remember some scenes here and there, but nothing about the characters really pops out as being particularly truthful or memorable.
Mm-hmm. Thanks.
I mean, there's nothing you can say to that. There's no answer you could give to that. It wasn't a question, but I just wanted to tell you that.
It's a statement and and praise.
Right, exactly.
This is a great interview.
I really appreciate it. You've given me so much time, and I appreciate it very much.
All right, you can keep going if you want.
Well, what I'm going to do is I will send you the link to the interview once it airs, and it'll be the next 2 weeks. It's June 1st now. It'll air the second week, like the 14th, I believe it'll air.
Yeah, if you got any more questions or anything, feel free to call. So.
Okay. Well,
I probably won't listen to it because I get incredibly self-conscious over those things. So.
Really?
Yeah, and I listen to them and I go, God, what an asshole! Why did I say that?
You've been terrific. I mean, you've been
really?
very articulate. I mean, you're a writer. You've been very articulate and answered each question. Some people get on here, and the big thing that I can't stand is the kind of vocal tics that people have, and I can't stand when they say every 2 seconds, and I tend to edit out. I've edited out 80 from a single interview because it's just unlistable. But you've been terrific.
Yeah. Oh, I did. I don't know if I did any at all, but
you did not.
Did I? Oh, good. You know who used to do that a lot is Obama. And somewhere along the way, someone pointed it out. He stopped doing that, but you can see he talks a little like a stutterer.
Right.
That there's something very or like a stutterer who doesn't stutter. Okay, a former stutterer. Let's put it that way. But you can see Obama will say something, and you see he wants to say, and there's just this little moment there where he swallows it. He's got to stop himself, and then he moves on. But it was a habit he must have had for years, and then somebody somewhere along the way said, "You got to stop that. It's really annoying." In the movie My Cousin Vinny, there's a point where one of the two boys, Stan, has lost faith in Vinny and decides to go with the public defender. And the public defender seems reasonably competent, but once it starts out, once the case actually starts, the public defender gets out there and start stuttering and stammering. Okay? And what I had written, although I'd actually written stuttering in, so he might have said t, tell the court something like, I wrote that in, but what I had written is very specific, was that the guy was having an anxiety attack, okay? He was hyperventilating, right? He was sweating. He was shaking, right? This guy was having almost a nervous breakdown in there, and the stammering and stuttering would be part of that, okay? He would lose thought, right? And but this is a guy who was like, having a terror out in the courtroom, right? Then what it was played like is really like a guy who, under very mild pressure, starts stuttering. But you didn't get the anxiety part, right? He just starts stuttering. He doesn't, and he didn't seem to understand he was stuttering. Because later he sits down and he says, "Well, I thought that went pretty well. What'd you think?" Now, I don't think I put that line in there because the guy was having an anxiety attack, and I think, here's a guy who wants to help you out of a murder case having an anxiety attack. I think that's funny. I think it's also real. And, I know what it's like. There's a couple times where I had certain stage fright. Although I managed to continue, I was, a nervous wreck, right? Doing these interviews used to make me a nervous wreck. Doing them, I remember the first time I spoke on a panel and had a microphone, I almost had an anxiety attack when I heard my own voice echoing back at me and everybody staring. I was going, wow, I didn't know that would make me that nervous, right?
Yeah.
But the first few times, it was the first 10 or 20 times, it was kind of nerve-wracking. And then I started to like it and get comfortable with it. Anyhow, that's what I had intended. And so what he had is a guy who was a stutterer. And I sort of felt it was making fun of stutterers. I was uncomfortable with it, right? When I heard it in an audience, the joke still worked, okay? Because the idea is, here's a guy, should not be representing you. It still works, right?
Right.
But, I had an old friend whose brother is a stutterer, and she was very offended by stutterer jokes. And I would never, ever write a movie with a stutter joke, right, a stutterer joke. I have a pretty good friend now who stutters, right? And I would never, ever make a joke about that. So now I have a movie out there that looks like I made this joke. So I wasn't happy with that. So I had a deal with Fox, right? And I'm driving in one day on the lawn, and there's a lone guy out there with a placard, right, who's picketing the studio by himself, "My Cousin Vinny, unfair to stutterers," and he's from the National Stutterers Association, something like that, right? And I come in, and my assistant gets up, and she says, "Did you see the guy out front?" I said, "Yeah." "Well, he's been calling." "Really?" "Yeah." And then I had a development girl came out, development person, came out, and she says, what are you gonna do? I said, "Next time he calls, put him on hold. I want you both to get on the phone to hear what I'm gonna do." And they were like, "Well, what are you gonna do?" I said, "You'll find out, right?" So I went in, and about 15 minutes later, she comes in. She says, "He's on the phone." I said, "Okay." So they all went into the hall. They both had phones, and we all pushed the button and got on. And I said hello, and he got on, and he was explaining, My Cousin Vinny was. I said, "Listen, I can see where you're going with this. Yeah, you are with the National Stutter Association. You felt the movie was maligning and being unfair and even making fun of stutterers. Yeah, and you were offended by that. Am I right?" He said, "Yes." I said, "I was offended by it myself." I said, "I would never, ever make fun of stutterers. I don't think that's funny." Yeah. What I'd written was a guy who was having an anxiety attack. That's a much different thing, okay? And this guy was sweating, he was stammering, he was trembling, he was shaking, he was losing his train of thought, okay? That's a whole different thing. I would never make fun of a stutterer. You do not have an issue with me or the studio. You have an issue with the director, Jonathan Lynn. And his home phone number is... And then I gave him the phone number. That was fun.
I bet he appreciated that.
I never heard from him.
Oh, you didn't? Okay.
No, I said that in other interviews. I've never heard that from Jonathan. Jonathan's the kind of guy where you like to poke at him anyway.
Yeah.
He brings out the bully in me.
It's got to be very satisfying for you, though, as a writer, to have written these characters and then see them come to life by actors like Steve Martin and Michael Caine and Joe Pesci and Marissa Tomei, who was a big discovery in that, and My Cousin Vinny. Do they ever exceed your initial conception of these characters? Do they surprise you?
No, they're generally more likely to disappoint me than surprise me. I'm just trying to think. Sometimes they'll put something in there I did not put in there. There is Marissa. One little moment. There's a scene later on where she's complaining about her biological clock. Right? She's upset with him. She has a little speech, and she says, "And my biological clock is ticking like this," and she stomps the floor 3 times. My biological clock is clicking like this, stomp, 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 and blah, 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 blah. What she had done, and I don't know which scene they shot first, but in the very first scene of the movie when they arrive and they get out of the car, and there was something that was wrong with one of the wheels, right? And then she sees somebody coming, and she stomps the ground to get Vinny's attention. And I thought that was good because it brought the stomping back in. It was also something like, I think, a Thompson's gazelle stomps the ground to warn the other gazelles a lion is in our midst. So that was a little moment in there. I'm just trying to think.
Well, with Dirty Rotten Scoundrels, because we haven't really touched on Dirty Rotten Scoundrels yet, that casting had to have pleased you. That pairing of Steve Martin and Michael Caine, because that pairing is everything, the chemistry in that film.
Yeah. That was a remake of a movie called Bedtime Story. Bedtime Story, the original starred David Niven and Marlon Brando.
Wow.
But those were not the actors it was written for. It was written by Stanley Shapiro and Paul Henning. And Stanley wrote or co-wrote all those Doris Day, Rock Hudson movies or Doris Day, Cary Grant movies, right? So he's done a couple movies with Doris Day and Rock Hudson and one and Cary Grant, okay? And he wanted to write a movie where Cary Grant and Rock Hudson compete for Doris Day. And at first they compete, and this was the movie. So you can see the Michael Caine part was to be played by Cary Grant. And I love Michael Caine, but Cary Grant. Even Michael Caine would say, "Ooh, boy."
Yeah.
That's pretty good. But I thought Michael Caine did a great job. Steve Martin brings a kind of goofiness to that character. The character, I don't think, was originally written to be all that goofy. And it's supposed to be more like a younger guy versus an older, sophisticated guy. One is sort of an American, brash American versus a European. And there was a rewrite where I played that up a little more. But we kind of went back to something closer to the original, which was, to be honest with you, the script that we used was essentially a 3-day rewrite. There was a lot of editing involved, and I put some more contemporary jokes. I wrote a lot faster than I write now. But if you meet Steve in real life, he's not a gregarious, big personality like a lot of comedians are. You have a dinner party, invite a comedian, and generally they'll be joking at the dinner party. they're very eager to get people to laugh. Steve's kind of shy, actually.
Mm-hmm.
Steve does not like strangers approaching him and saying, hello, I'm a big fan. Now, oddly enough, the director that we went with, Frank Oz,
mm-hmm.
Frank wanted Steve Martin to play the part that Michael Caine played. Think about that. So Steve would have to sort of put on airs as a more sophisticated man. I'm not exactly sure how he would have played it. I can imagine him playing that. But I'm not sure if he would have played it right. I don't know. He could have played it a little silly. That's easy for him.
Yeah.
But as a sophisticated kind of Cary Grant-like figure, I have never seen him play that yet.
Right.
Anyways, but that's what Frank Oz wanted him to do, which I thought was weird. I was like, if anything, shouldn't he be playing Freddy? And he goes, oh, no. Have you met Steve? I said, no. Oh, he's a very sophisticated, erudite man. I'll take your word for it, but the audience knows him as the jerk, right? Yeah. And he's played a character like that in other movies he has written, right? They were to read with Richard, what's his name? Jaws, Richard Dreyfuss. Mm-hmm. So Richard Dreyfuss comes into play to read, right? And Dreyfuss assumed he was being offered the role of Lawrence Jameson, not of Freddy, because he didn't see Steve as Lawrence. He thought Steve is Freddy, right?
Right.
And he had not prepared for that, so he didn't want to read for that. He says, well, yeah. So he was there, and so, Frank says, well, Steve, you want to read Lawrence, or you want to read Freddy, and we'll let Richard read Lawrence. They said, yeah. What happened is, I remember Frank calling me, telling me what happened, and said, Steve is great at Freddy. You couldn't believe, but Steve plays that jerk character really well, right? Like, where have you been? The past 10 years. It was bizarre to me, but it's kind of funny. So that's how Steve ended up as Freddy. But it would not, had they gone in the original intention, I don't know how that movie would have turned out. I don't know who would have played Freddy. Nobody really wanted Michael Caine but me. Probably shouldn't say that publicly, because they all deny that, of course, later. But they had gone out to other people, and they couldn't get other people in the role. So finally, they just went to Michael Caine. And Michael Caine even said, they offered this to me, and then, I don't know, I said I wanted to do it, and then it went away. And, nobody told him the truth.
And you're writing, and I guess all good genre filmmaking works on this principle. I think about the contrasts. I mean, the contrast between those two lead characters in Dirty Rotten Scoundrels, the contrast of Vinny being kind of out of his element, and that's where all the comedy is drawn from. I mean, is that the crucial element?
Yeah, there's a certain kind of conflict there.
Yeah.
Vinny's an interesting movie. I mean, is there an antagonist in that movie?
Mm-mm.
Now, the director did try to make the judge into a little bit of an asshole, right?
Uh-huh.
But he's not a real antagonist. And personally, I would have preferred some of that. I mean, there was something in there where Vinny makes an objection, and he kind of uses some rather, florid legal terms. And the judge says that is a well-thought-out, lucid argument. Yeah.
Yes.
Objection denied, right? Overruled, right?
Right, yeah.
And I didn't write that. I didn't like it because it made the judge kind of an asshole. I did not want the judge to be an asshole. I wanted the judge to be tough. That's Vinny's conflict. Vinny does not know the ropes. Vinny does not know Alabama criminal court procedure. He doesn't know anything about criminal court procedure. He doesn't know anything about court procedure, right? And so that's all we need, right? So his antagonist, if there is one, is just reality, right?
Mm-hmm.
He's his own worst enemy, right? He's gotten himself into it, and God damn it, he's got to work his way out. So, you know, I didn't want to make the judge a nice guy, per se, but I didn't want to make him evil, right? I think that's wrong. Yeah. And that little joke, that little laugh, that's one of those things that could have been cut out of the movie. The movie was too long. It was about at least 10 minutes too long, and you could have cut 10 minutes out. I would have lost that joke because it would have enhanced the character and enhanced the movie a little bit. I don't know, why would the judge say that's a good argument? Go fuck yourself.
That's true.
Just mean. Yeah.
Yeah, that is true.
And it's a good grounds to for a mistrial, right? Or if not a mistrial, to go back and retry the case. Look, the judge had a bias against me because I'm not a local, right? He was being a bigot. Yeah. Look, here's an example. Look what he said. Yeah. He didn't even explain why it was overruled. That's little stuff that I find to be a little inconsistent. Some people find it to be minor. To me, when a movie is clean of all that stuff, it works better. Did you know Vinnie's character? Why Vinnie? It took Vinnie 6 times to pass the bar and 6 years to get through law school. Do you know why? Because Vinnie's dyslexic. You want to know why you didn't know that? Director cut it out. One line. Someone says, took you 6 years to get the bar, 6 times to pass the bar? How come? He says, I'm a little dyslexic. Next scene, he meets with the judge. Judge gives him a book. It's 3 inches thick, Criminal Court Procedure of Alabama. You're to read this book over the weekend. There's no way he's going to get through that book, right? Now, I even showed, how you can show dyslexia, and the director didn't like that.
Huh.
And so it got cut out of the script. Now,
that raises the stakes for the character, yeah.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Now, there was another scene in there where she says to him, she sees he's struggling through the book, she says, do you want me to help you read? Want me to read to you? And he looks at him, I don't want you to read. I'm not a fucking child. She says, I know, but you got your reading thing, I'm not a fucking child, right? So you see he's a little proud about it, which is very consistent with his character, right? And it also makes sense. One, he's not stupid. Yeah. He just can't read quickly. So he's going to go in there on a wing and a prayer. And he doesn't know the procedure. He's going to learn it, right? Can't read it. He's going to learn it. And at the very end of the movie, she wants to help him. And he has too much pride, right? And then finally, she took some pictures. She had no idea what she was taking pictures of, but she took the pictures, and he's looking at it, and it realizes to him, oh, my God, this picture is going to help, right?
Yeah.
He goes out. She's furious at him, right? And she's, come on, and she doesn't want to go. She doesn't want to go in. No, get on the stage. Just get on the fucking stand. Get on the stand, And it becomes a great scene because she's helping. She wants to help. He won't let her. He let his pride get in the way. He looks at the picture. He's actually cracked the case. He doesn't have to put her on the stand, right? Mm-hmm. But he puts her on as an apology, as a loving moment, right? As a loving sharing thing between the two of them. And it's a great, sweet thing. It's great, But it doesn't quite work because he took that dyslexia out.
When you're talking about this, it makes me think about the kind of integrity of the characters that you write and how it needs to be based on a reality. And I think of a lot of comedies that they probably think of a funny situation and then they throw some characters in there to make it happen.
Yeah.
So I guess the secret to comedies that last and are meaningful is to have it come honestly from the characters.
Yeah.
And not the opposite way around.
Yeah.
Again, not something that I said that requires any answer. But there you go.